So we pick up right where we left off. We are now in day 2 of the Eastern Open, and having 1 point out of 2, I wasn't expecting to play anyone super strong because obviously I'm on a 50% score. But when I got the pairing that morning, I found out that I would be actually playing another international master with a rating of 2480 USCF, 2342 FIDE, which, by the way, I've decided to kind of change the format a little bit and display the FIDE ratings now in addition to the USCF ratings. You can let me know in the comments if that's something I should keep, but I think that's especially relevant for this tournament where I'm playing some notably strong players. So, yeah, this guy is a pretty experienced IM. Obviously not at his peak, but he's a good player. So I opened with e4, and I knew he was going to play the Sicilian, and I knew he was going to play the Najdorf. I didn't know what line he would play against the Adams attack with h3. I thought maybe he would play e5, but he played g6, which is a less common line, but definitely playable, going for more of like a dragon setup. And g4, still the move. And I played these next couple moves all very quickly because this is still all part of my preparation. I mean, it's all pretty standard theory. Bishop e3, knight c6, and white here will go for long castle. So we get kind of this dragon position. He goes rook c8. A little bit unusual, though, compared to the setup in most dragons, where usually you have a pawn on f3, and you're looking to play like g4 and h4 at some point. Here I already have a pawn on g4, but I have a bishop on g2, which you don't normally see in the dragon, so it's quite an interesting position. So this was actually the first moment that I kind of stopped to think a bit, although I knew the move that I had in my preparation was the move f4, but I kind of considered some other options, like maybe g5. Bishop h6 here would actually be premature because he can actually just take, and then take on d4, and even possibly sacrifice the rook on c3, play queen a5, and black quickly gets a lot of counterplay. So I just went with my prep move f4, and the most common move here for black is knight a5, obviously threatening to go to the c4 square, kind of provoking b3. But he took on d4 after thinking for like maybe 10 or 12 minutes. He was clearly out of theory as well. And I take back, and he goes bishop c6. So he's kind of setting up to pressure the e4 pawn, but I didn't think this was particularly effective because I thought for a while, and I decided to just play g5, because if I can kick the knight away and trade dark square bishops, why not just do that? And this was a correct decision. I forced his knight away. I took the bishop. He actually took back with the knight, and now is another interesting moment. I decided to just go h4 because opposite sides castling, I'm not going to waste any time trying to attack. He goes b5. Obviously, he's looking to make counterplay. So, kind of an interesting moment here because I felt like I needed to get my attack going as quickly as possible. And so I played a very ambitious move. I played the move h5. Engine actually likes just going king b1 here and just waiting to see what he does, because even if he goes b4, I can even just go knight d5, or potentially even knight back to e2. But knight d5 is pretty good. And what I didn't like about this was I kind of didn't like how his knight kind of gets a good square on f5, but at the same time, I'm going to go h5 here, and my attack is going to pick up steam very quickly. So perhaps king b1 was the wisest move, but I decided to go h5 and actually give him the pawn, because I figured now I go bishop f3, and now, obviously, if he goes back, if I go queen h2, actually he has h5 here, allowing me to take en passant, but then he moves the knight, and the problem is that my pawn is in the way of my queen. But what I had actually realized is I can play rook h6 first, and then bring the queen or the rook over to the h-file, and this is going to be devastating for him. But he counters with b4 at this point, so obviously I don't have time to take the knight right away. I have to move my own knight first. And again, I decided not to go to d5 because I kind of didn't like knight g3, hitting the rook, and then the knight comes to f5. But here there are actually some crazy lines, which I didn't really calculate all that much in the game. Like queen h2, first of all. He takes the rook, and then I saw he has h5 here, and I thought that my attack is stopped, because if I sacrifice on h5, he goes king g7, but I actually missed, well, actually, I think I saw this, but I missed in this position that I have this move bishop h7, just shutting down his rook, threatening queen h6 mate, and actually white gets a very big attack here. Queen comes to g7, king has to basically escape to d7, and there's this check. Actually, if rook comes to f8, bishop f5, and he's like paralyzed. So, turns out, if we back up to this position, perhaps I should have played the knight to d5 and allowed any kind of knight maneuvers by him. Maybe queen d7 here was a better defense for black, because the queen is able to defend g4, or maybe plant itself on f5 and defend the h7 pawn. But anyway, I decided to just go back with the knight. And my idea was that now I can, well, first of all, I cover g3, so his knight is kind of stuck. And I also have ideas of going to d4. He now goes queen a5, though. So obviously, very sharp position. He's not going to waste any time to create some kind of counter threats. And so, again, like if I take the knight, he's going to take on a2. He threatens mate. And I briefly calculated this, actually, but I saw bishop a4, and I wasn't about to go for this, because here it looks like I'm just losing. So I went king b1, and here he played this move f5, which I actually had already realized he was going to do, obviously hinting at the fact that he has this pin here on this diagonal, and if I take his knight, I, again, didn't like the prospect of him taking on e4. Now he hits my c2 pawn. If I go knight d4, now he's going to take the bishop, and his queen can come to d5, and then it can come back to f7 and kind of cover everything. There were a couple other interesting lines that I looked at, but I eventually realized that I just have to take en passant here and allow him to bring his knight back. So he's kind of happy because he was able to save his knight from the rim, not allow me to really do any serious damage, but at the same time, he is missing his f-pawn. So even though I'm down a pawn here, I still felt like I have a little bit of compensation, and I can still get an attack going. Actually, this is another critical moment in the game, because I had a big opportunity here. And actually, if you want, you can pause and just think about what you would play for white here to kind of try to keep the attack going. So the first move that I considered, but kind of quickly discarded, was knight d4, because I saw that I'd lose this pawn, and then my queen gets hit with tempo. But turns out, actually, after queen e3, black has to be very careful, because if he, for example, defends the knight this way, I can swing over to h3, and I'm hitting here and threatening to come in at the queen this way, and I get a big attack after the move f5, where I'm just about to open up the king side. He also has the option to go queen d5, but here, again, this f5 move is very strong, and I get this check in. He has to put his king on f7, because if he goes king here, I actually have mate in 2. Check, and this very cool mate. And then I would be able to take on f5, and here there's like some crazy lines with knight d2, and who knows what's happening here, but white definitely has enough activity to not be worse. And the other move which came to mind that I really should have taken more seriously is the move f5. And there's actually a couple things to calculate here. First of all, black can just take the pawn straight up, or they can take on e4, and there's one other move that is objectively the best. If they take on f5, like, yeah, the king is open, but if you just give a simple check like here, king can just even start to escape via f7, and worst case scenario, black can run the king to d7. There's only one move in this position which keeps white's attack going, and I would have had to, first of all, find this move, which threatens rook to g1 check. But after bishop takes e4, this is like really the critical line here, because now, I mean, I just lost another pawn. c2 is hanging with check. The only move that works here, if I just take this and go check, his king starts to escape, just like before. Only move is the move queen g5 check. And the point is that if king h8, I can take this, and he can't take with the pawn because his queen hangs, and he can't take with the knight because of the same thing. Rook takes h7 and rook h1. So he would have to go king f7, and now again I can take this, and he still can't take with the pawn because of the pin on the 5th rank. Can't take with the knight because this is just mate. So he would have to just basically give up a piece, and I would have to convert this position, basically with an extra knight for a pawn. So that's all one variation. Then there's also the possibility of bishop takes e4 here, without taking on f5. But it's fairly similar because the queen comes to h6, and after rook f7, I can just take on g6, and the attack is going to be super strong. Black also has this resource, though, knight g5, giving up the knight for a couple pawns, and white is just better in this position, up a piece for 2 pawns. The objectively best defense, though, would be after f5 to play queen e5, centralizing the queen. And one sample line goes like this, where queen h6, threatening mate. Rook f7 doesn't really defend well because I take here. So black has to go here, and they have to give up the exchange. And white is just better in this position, but it's still not clear. It's like a lot of work still to be done. But I kind of chickened out of any of those really sharp ideas. I probably should have spent more time calculating, but I ended up just playing knight g3 because I thought I'm defending this pawn pretty well, and I can maybe play f5 soon. But if you give an international master even one tempo like this, they're obviously going to use it to their advantage. So he plays bishop a4, attacking the c2 pawn. I block with b3, but now he plays rook c3. Not moving the bishop, but rather attacking my bishop, so I knew that I can't allow him to take, so I played queen g2, which was actually a pretty nice move on my part, which not only defends the bishop, but because I put the queen on the g-file, I had now some ideas of going knight f5. But again, he didn't move his bishop back. He played rook fc8 pretty quickly. And I understood that if I take this bishop right now, he's going to take on c2. If I move the queen, he takes on a4, I'm getting checkmated. So I basically have to give up the queen, or so I thought. And even though I have 2 rooks and a bishop for a queen here, he's going to go b3. And, I mean, if I take the pawn, then I'm going to lose the bishop because it's a fork. But even if I don't, I mean, here again, there's this check. I would have to put the king on a1. Just looks very unpleasant. It turns out, actually, what I didn't see was that after rook takes c2, I have this move rook c1. Very cool defense where I can give up the queen, but then again, I basically get 2 rooks and a bishop for a queen. But even though material is technically on my side, because my king is so exposed, he gets a lot of counterplay with even just the queen and the knight. And eventually I'm going to have to give up the exchange, and we're going to have this position which somehow still favors black with the queen, even though I have, what should be more material, but king is still very open. There's the passed h-pawn. So I made the right decision not to take and play rook d2, and he decided to go back with the bishop, looking to maybe reroute to f7. Another moment here where I had some good options to choose from. I could have played perhaps knight h5, which I somehow didn't even consider. What I did consider was the move knight f5, which threatens knight takes c7. But then I saw that he has this idea rook takes f3, where if I take, he takes my knight. And I don't want to give up 2 minor pieces for a rook like that. But actually, what I could have done here is take on an e7, and then taken the rook. And the difference is that now if he takes on e7, I can play e5 and just rip the center open and get a big attack. He can throw in rook c3, but even here with e5, like this position is very unclear. I can centralize the queen, try to come in this way, try to come into h4. So definitely a lot of play here, despite him having the two minor pieces for the rook. So I missed another opportunity there. I played rook e1, just intending to play e5, but this is a bit too simple of a move and too easy to defend against. He goes rook c5 and totally neutralizes my threats. And there was actually another idea to this move which I didn't realize. I, in this position, decided to play knight f5 because I didn't really see another way to try to keep my attack going. But the idea of this move is, first of all, to attack e7, and second of all, to reroute the knight to d4 and possibly to e6, which is kind of the weak square in his position. And when I played this move, he kind of quickly went back with the queen, defending the pawn on e7. Obviously, I was starting to take with check, so he goes back, and I go knight d4 now, which I was happy to do because now I'm starting to come in here. He goes bishop f7, and now I started to kind of hit my stride a little bit. I played the move bishop g4, which I thought was a nice idea, again, looking to sneak into e6. Either the knight could go there or the bishop, but he has a hard time defending the square, so he decides to take the bishop. What he actually could have done was play queen a5, allowed me to just play knight e6, because what he can do is bring the knight into e3, or if I take on g4, he has this cool idea, rook takes c2. And he ends up getting the knight back after a series of checks, and here black is actually winning. But he decided to just go and take the bishop. He was getting a bit low on the clock. I think he had maybe around 20 minutes at this point. And so I take back. And now he really kind of started to lose the thread. He could have even played e5 here. Idea being that if I jump in here, he can even just trade and block the check. And like this position is kind of anyone's for the taking because he now has a passed off pawn, but his king is also a bit vulnerable. And if I play f takes e5, then he can just take with the rook, and his rook kind of covers, the king side a little bit better. But he goes queen c8. He offers a queen trade, which I, of course, am not going to take because I need to keep attacking him. I go queen h4. And I got scared, actually, for a second that I allowed e5, and my knight has to move away, and then he takes on c2, but actually e5 would not have worked because I can just go knight f5 here. And he cannot capture because I have a check on g1, and after he blocks, I can take it this way, and my rooks are just coming in. I'm about to take his bishop and just, again, blow open the king side. Like, if he comes here, I come here, and he's just totally overloaded. He went queen f8, though. Like, he was really going into defensive mode, but this is the kind of position where you just can't afford to be defensive. Like, you have to either go for counterplay or, you're basically accepting defeat. And so I really started to realize after I played rook g1 that I have some big chances here to win the game. I have only 15 minutes left, but he also has, maybe just about as much. He goes king h8, and I didn't spend too long. I played the move f5 because it's go time. I have to open the king side, and he was really beginning to realize he was in trouble. Like, he was shaking his head. He was really trying to figure out how to get out of this. It's not an easy position because I'm threatening to take on g6. He won't be able to take back with the bishop because I have this h-file pin. So, like, for example, if I take on g6, I can win the bishop very simply because pawn is pinned. And if he takes on f5, then he just invites my knight into the attack. So, tough position for him. If he goes queen g7, I was just going to take this, and then actually I have knight e6, or even rook g2 is even stronger. So he plays rook e5. He has like maybe 5 or 6 minutes left by this point, and we still have 7 moves until time control. I decided now, so I actually considered going rook h2, and forcing him to play queen g7 and then taking on g6, maybe going knight f5. But then I saw he has queen f7, and I wasn't really sure how to go forward. Again, the strongest move was actually just to go rook d to g2, just doubling up on the g file. Somehow I didn't consider this. I decided just to take on g6 right away because I saw that I'm either winning a pawn or I'm winning a piece. And actually, more than that. I mean, I'm threatening g7 as well. So he has to take. And I take the bishop, and I'm like, I just want a piece. I should be winning. And then he goes check, and then he goes rook h3. And I hadn't seen this at all. And the point is that now he is trying to get rid of my queen. Once I move away, the rook on g6 is hanging. So for a moment, I was like, what just happened? Did I just lose control? But then I realized that, wait a minute, I actually am still in control here because I have a way out of this mess. What I could have actually played is rook g1. Point being that if he takes my queen, I take his queen, and vice versa. If he takes my rook, I take his rook. But I found an even more fancy way to win the game. I played the move rook to g8 check. And the point is that I'm giving up the rook, but I now give this check with the queen, and his king is totally exposed. If he goes back to h8, I just go rook g2. I'm threatening mate on g8, and he has no way to stop it other than going back with the queen, but then he loses the rook. If he goes to f8, it's the same idea. Rook g2, and actually here he has to, again, either go back to f7 or sack the queen. He went to f7, though, but the same problem he's facing. I go rook g2, and if he moves the rook, let's say to h1, threatening mate, I calculated that because the knight is in the center, covers the e6 square, very important detail, I have check, and I actually have checkmate, or checkmate on f8 as well. So after I played rook g2, he was down to a minute or two, and he simply resigned because he realized that he's just losing. He's losing his queen, basically. I thought that he was going to sacrifice his queen and try to play on in this position with two rooks against the queen and the knight, but he was just not even about to do that. So he resigned, and I scored a shock upset against an IM, by far the strongest player I'd ever beaten over the board. My previous best win was against a low 2300 national master. So this was a big step up and a big upset win to go to 2 points out of 3. Now, a little addendum that I would be remiss if I didn't share. When I got back to the hotel room, of course, I was really hype, celebrating the win with my friends. My routine after a game is usually to input the moves into the computer, into ChessBase, put in some of the variations, try to see, maybe analyze it just a little bit. And I actually also put the game into Lichess so that I could put it into a GIF format so that I could share it on Twitter, as I later did. Only when I put it into Lichess, I just happened to run a computer analysis real quick. I usually don't try to analyze the game with the engine right after the game because I want to still go back and look at it without having the engine's input. But I just happened to see this graph. And so I said, wait a minute, what? This means that I was completely losing for at least a stretch of the game. And so I went back to the moment, and lo and behold, in this position where my opponent played bishop back to e8, and I had played rook e1. Remember how I said this move rook to c5 is important? Because not only does it stop me from playing e5, but it sets up something which my opponent actually himself didn't fully realize. And when I played this move knight f5, he had played queen c7 back to defend the e7 pawn, but actually what he needed to do is just ignore the threat and go all in and play the move queen a3. And if he had done this, I almost certainly would have lost the game, because even if I take this pawn here, and even if I bring the knight back, he plays, or he can take the knight first and go rook to a5, and there's just no defense. I can't defend the a2 pawn. I have to make way for the king, and I am about to be hunted. Actually, so he could go for a series of checks here and even sacrifice the rook, but then the king could maybe get away. The point is that if I take, then there's going to be checkmate. Rook to a1 is coming, no matter where the king goes. But if he sacks, I can actually get away. But the problem is that in this position, there is this deadly move, bishop to b5. And it hits the rook, but it also covers the d3 square, and the bishop could head there, and yeah, there's really no defense here. Even though his king looks very open, I have no way to get to it. Like, for example, if I bring the rook to e7, he can now proceed with his attack. He can go check, and actually now sack the rook, and the problem is that now this is checkmate because my king doesn't have the d3 square. And if I go to e3, then I lose this rook. And, I mean, if I don't do anything in this position, then, I mean, it's going to be pretty much the same outcome. I mean, at the very least, he could win the rook, but he's probably going to do more than that and eventually checkmate me. So, yeah, pretty lucky there that my opponent didn't find this critical queen a3 idea here, and he went back instead, which really shifted the momentum of the game. But listen, sometimes that's what happens, especially in very complicated positions. Even very strong players, even international masters, can make mistakes like this, miss wins. That's just how the game goes. And luckily for me, this is one of those cases, and I managed to survive that scare and come out on top. So in the fourth round, I am now back with the black pieces after having two whites in a row, and I am facing my first national master of the tournament. I faced two international masters so far, but this is the first national master in the 2200 USCF range, just over 2000 FIDE. He was actually much stronger before. He had a peak USCF rating of like high 2300s, peak FIDE almost 2300. He scored an IM norm about 10 years ago. So I knew this was going to be a very another tough game against a very experienced player. He played d4. And I knew that he plays some kind of like fianchetto systems against the King's Indian. I was actually preparing for one line that I saw he plays, but he surprised me by playing b3, which is another fianchetto system, but not the one that I was expecting. And he actually goes for this kind of double fianchetto setup with b3 and g3. And I hit him with this early c5, which is a pretty nice idea, attacking the center. If white ever takes, then I have queen a5, winning back the pawn. He goes bishop g2. I took, because I'm basically going for a favorable trade. I trade my c-pawn for his d-pawn. He takes, and I play d5. And this is a kind of the idea for black in these lines, is that if you can get d5 in before they can play c4, black is doing well. And here he could have played c4, that was supposedly his best move, but he just goes knight to d2, and I realized that I now have a chance here to get already an advantage as black, because he's allowing me to play the move e5. And after I kick the knight back, I can even play e4. And his knight has to come back, and now I go knight c6, and he should have played, again, either c4 or something like e3 here, but he actually took the knight, which even further helps me because now I get this very stable central structure, just basically two pawns in the center, and the c6 pawn reinforcing. So I was definitely happy at this point. He was kind of a little bit caught off guard, like he didn't really know this line or what to do that well. And he plays bishop d4 here, kind of trying to blockade my pawn and maybe stop me from playing c5. And this is the first moment where I really stopped to think. I wasn't too sure what to do. Like, I knew my position is good, but I didn't know, should I go like a5, a4? Should I go rook e8? I decided eventually just to play bishop f5, just to develop the light square bishop, and maybe go queen d7 and bishop h3. He struck back with c4, and I decided to go queen d7. Actually, knight g4 here would have been an interesting move, allowing the trade of bishops, but I can plant the knight on e5, and there's some ideas for black to just kind of slowly build up, maybe even h5, h4, just kind of sit with their nice space advantage. But I played queen d7, and he goes queen c1, hinting that he might want to go and bring his queen out and also contest my dark square bishop. And I basically just decided to go for this trade. But he also goes for queen c3 and attacks here. So it becomes pretty clear that we're about to trade all the bishops off the board, and that's what happens. So a little bit of an opportunity miss for me. If we go back, I probably should have just not forced things so much, because by this point, once we trade all these pieces, like, it's kind of allowed him to equalize a bit, although he still is a bit unhappy with this knight on d2. Like, he would really like for this knight to be somewhere better, but it's hard for this knight to get into the game. And he played another kind of move here, which I thought was strange, queen f6. Because it's not really clear what his queen is doing. Like, I thought maybe he just wants to stop me from playing f5, or I wasn't really sure what the idea is, but I just played rook e8, and he plays e3 because he doesn't want to allow me to play it, so he goes e3, and now I was starting to think, like, can I even try to trap his queen somehow? I mean, I can obviously kick him back. I maybe could have played rook to d8, but I decided to go knight f5. Starting to improve the pieces a bit. I was starting to think, like, can I even maybe trap his queen somehow with rook e6? He decides to take on d5, and he goes rook c1. So this kind of hinted to me that maybe he wants to go queen c6 and maybe try to trade queens, and if he gets control of the c-file, then he'll be doing well, or at least better than before. And so I thought for a bit, and I decided to go for a very dynamic play in this position with the move d4. But the idea was not to actually take back when he took. The idea was not to play knight takes d4. The idea was to play e3. Because the point is that if he now takes my pawn, I take back, and it's a fork. I'm winning the exchange. I'm opening up the e-file for my rook. It's going to be borderline decisive. So he goes knight f3, and he just lets me keep this pawn on e3. And this was actually one of the biggest moments of the game, because I have this pawn here, and I have, like, still some potential, but I kind of rushed in this position to take on f2, when I could have pushed the pawn, but I didn't like this because he just blockades it, and there's not really any way to progress here. I also considered queen d5, kind of trying to work on a pin here, but he can kind of intercept the queen and even go rook e5. The move which I could have really played is rook e6. I don't think I actually saw this move in this specific position. But the idea is that now I can bring another rook to the e-file, and if he goes here, I can even go rook f6. And the idea is that, like, let's just give him a slow move. I have the chance to take on f2 and play knight e3, or even stronger idea is to go queen somewhere, like let's say queen b7 or queen d5, somewhere on the diagonal. And then there's this brutal idea, knight h4 check, where he can't take with the, well, he basically has to take with the queen, because he can't take with the knight anyway. He can't take with the pawn because he loses the queen. But then I take here, and I'm just crushing, because I'm going to take on f2 next. And if he plays rook c7, again, queen d5, and yeah, this idea of knight h4 is like a constant, very big threat. I instead took on f2, because I saw that, I saw that if he takes with the rook, I just go knight e3, and I have some attack. Like, I'm going to go, and actually I have knight g4 coming. If he takes the king, he wouldn't want to do that, because again, knight e3, I hit the rook, and knight g4 is a threat. But he plays knight e5. And I'm not in time for knight e3 because my own queen is hanging. If I go check, then he can just go king h3. And I didn't like here that, if I take here, he takes here, and we kind of trade things down. A key move which I missed, though, is that instead of queen d5 check, I can go queen d7 check, which makes a huge difference, because now if he goes king h3, I can go rook e6, and my f7 pawn is protected. And if he takes on f2, in this position, his queen is, again, kind of stuck. Like, if he goes here, I can go f6, and if he takes here, then I'm just going to be up. I'm I'm going to be up a knight, basically, even for a couple pawns. And he can also block here, but I, again, end up picking up an exchange at the end of the line. So this was another big moment. Queen b7 I could have played, but I rushed here and I played knight e3. Because, again, I had kind of exhausted a lot of time trying to build up this attack. And this is only move 25, and I was kind of conscious of the fact that I needed to speed up a bit. So I played knight e3 check, thinking that if he takes on f2, actually I have this move rook takes e5, removing the defender of the g4 square for a fork. But he plays king f3, and this is a move I had not seen, because I had just, I'd only spent a minute to play knight e3, didn't realize he could do this, because the king is like so exposed, but this is the only safe square, actually, because if he had gone back, then I have queen d5, but he goes king f3, and I was like, wow, what do I do? I have to basically give up the rook, because otherwise, I can't save my knight and my queen, so I take on e5, and I win back the rook, but this position, I basically no longer have an advantage. I played the move rook to e8, he moved his queen back, and actually after giving this check, I offered a draw, because what I saw was that after he takes this pawn, I can go here, and I can allow him to take another pawn, but then I take on d4, and I go rook d2, he has to cover, and then basically like this repetition would ensue. And so he thought in this position for a few minutes, and then decided to accept my draw. He also could have, there's also the idea in this position to play rook e1, but then again check, and actually here he has to be careful, like not to, well, what I saw in the game was that I go here and I'm going to give a bunch of checks with the queen, but I think there's actually something better, like maybe even rook to d1 and try to just attack the king because it's so open. So he decided just not to risk anything and make a draw. This guy is like a very solid player. He actually ended up finishing this tournament with, I think, 3 wins and 5 draws or something, or maybe 2 wins and 6 draws, so he didn't mind taking another draw. It was a decent game. I was a little bit annoyed that I missed like some winning chances. Nothing huge, but there were some moments where I could have won the exchange. I didn't know that during the game, but as it turns out, I did have some big chances, but a draw with black against a master is not a bad result, and so I finish day 2 on 2.5 points out of 4. Not a bad start, but there's still 4 more rounds to go.